Learning Network podcast. This is our 102nd episode, and I am Joan Brown. I'm your host today. Troy Cockrum is on vacation because it's still summer, and I am lucky enough to be here at the EdTech Google Summit in Northern Virginia. This is in Falls Church, and with me today is our keynote speaker from this conference, Ken Shelton. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
Ken, first of all, let's get a background. Tell me a little bit about where you're from and your teaching background.
So I born and raised and still live in Los Angeles. That's where I grew up. It's also where I went to UCLA, go Bruins. And I've spent roughly the last 14 years teaching in the Los Angeles Unified School District. And I just recently left the classroom back in January to work with EdTech team who produces these events, among other things. Excuse me, their iOS events and PD and lots of offerings out there. But I left the classroom to work with the team, and so that's part of my role here is as a logistical support as well as a speaker. So that's pretty much my background. As far as teaching goes, most of my experience actually was in technology lab, but I also have a credential in social studies as well as English.
Oh, very similar background. Great. I kind of want to give people the feel of what it's like to be here at a summit. There is always this anticipation of a big keynote, which you definitely did. You delivered. And then there's this buzz afterwards. And some of the things that you say in the keynote seem to be reflected in sessions. And I'm going to key in on a portion of that, which was responsibility. You brought in the idea of digital natives and digital immigrants, which was funny because I kind of find that a misnomer as well.
Okay.
That's what you said in your keynote. And your reasoning was right on. It has to do with how they use the tech. You want to elaborate a little bit on that? I know, not giving away.
Right. No, it's okay. So my big thing with that is that a lot of the kids, they have what appears to be an embedded or inherent skill set that involves the use of technologies and more specifically digital technologies, i.e. smartphones, tablets, and things of that nature. And what you find is that a lot of the content that is produced by kids without any degree of guidance or support tends to be what I call either an irresponsible use, or actually one of the attendees at this particular summit didn't believe, or their opinion wasn't that, the example I used wasn't that it was irresponsible, it could have been construed as satire. My response was, if that's construed as satire, then the question I would ask that child is, how would you identify that as being satirical, and what motivated you to do that? And the main message behind me showing that is that no, most of the time they do not use it in a meaningful and in turn responsible, because just simply posting a YouTube video of friends spitting water on each other, that might be humorous, but that's not necessarily meaningful or responsible. And my main point with that is from an educational perspective, in that if the kids have those skill sets, then we can take advantage of them for educationally appropriate and meaningful content that's published online.
I totally agree, and I sometimes see that the kids do not even realize what they have. They don't think about using something for an academic purpose, and when they're just shown that, did you realize you can look that up on your phone, there's this surprise look. It's they just haven't thought of it. So many times it's just the teacher's role to make them aware of a responsible use. And it's good. We have that role now, and we should use it often.
I agree. The other side to it for some teachers that I've had the opportunity to speak with is, a lot of times we feel like we have to know everything. And to me, a valuable skill set for any teacher nowadays, and especially a teacher that has been, in the classroom for a decent number of years, is being able to identify who your experts or those that have expertise in the room are as far as the kids go, tap into that, and task them with bringing their classmates up to their level but of course within an appropriate pedagogical setting. So if I have a couple of kids that are skilled at writing, and I have a couple of kids that are skilled at video, and I have a couple of kids that are skilled at, you know, tinkering on a computer, well, then I put them all together. I now theoretically have a production team. Okay? And so then it's a function of, okay, so if I have a production team, now let me have you cultivate your current skill sets you all have, work together as a team, and produce something meaningful for class. That's my main thing with the tech in general, is that we don't need to know the ins and outs of literally everything. Some of us like to, some of us don't have the time to, and some of us don't want to. What I think it's more a function of is building the relationships with the kids in general, so that you know who has an expertise or a passion in a particular area, and aligning the different skill sets in a classroom to serve a classroom or learning environment purpose.
And teachers most are very familiar with a jigsaw kind of structure in the classroom for learning content. Use that for learning technology as well. I have found, I used to call it trickle-down learning in my classroom, where if I sat down with a group and I taught them something, then I would send them out, and it's your turn to teach someone else how to use this particular technology. We were talking right before the show a little bit about, you know, here we are on the East Coast, you're from the West Coast, and we always have that opinion that the West Coast is far advanced as far as, you know, being Silicon Valley, being Hollywood, and so we wonder, you know, is that going to get into our classrooms? Are we going to have a more high-tech classroom in the future? You want to kind of talk about what you see coming up?
So I don't really think there is a significant difference between the East and the West Coast, believe it or not.
It's good to
hear. In fact, I'll even go out on a limb to some degree and share that, because I've been fortunate enough to speak at events in other parts of the world, there really isn't a major difference across the board.
That's terrific.
And in many ways, believe it or not, we are far more advanced and progressive than a lot of other countries that we would not believe that they aren't. And so then, with that being said, you know, going back to what we shared about the kids having a knowledge of different tools, being able to use them, and then, you know, like you said, bringing some degree of professionalism, if you will, to the classroom. That was where I had mentioned before the show started about my whole concept of what I call media literacy. And that is ultimately the kids being able to effectively communicate whatever that message is through a responsible use of media. In some of the workshops that I've done, I've identified where you can take a video of a particular topic, and, you know, one, the literate component is how it's captured, what types of scenes are used, how it's edited, how that whole story is put together, and then even the layers on that, what kind of music is selected. You know, if you're doing a story that is more of a somber feel to it, you're not going to use heavy metal music.
Right.
Now, the kids having that knowledge and that awareness of that fits right under media literacy. It's having a knowledge of communicating a message through the use of media to recognize that, okay, if it's somber, I probably need some lower tempo, smoother music, not the hardcore, heavy-hitting, you know, head-banging electric guitar. This just doesn't fit. So I do think that that's one element. And, you know, the hard part for us in schools is being able to have access to some of the resources that the professionals have, that in many cases are very expensive, like movie cameras.
Right.
But, you know, it's no different than, you know, a professional basketball player. The shoes don't make them a better player. Their skill set is what makes them a better player. Yes, the shoes help, I mean, as far as a few things, but ultimately, if they were to put on, you know, just regular flip-flops, my guess is they still could do some of the things that they already do on the court just as effectively, whether it's shooting free throws or something like that. So what I think for the kids and for us as educators in general is identifying what are the core foundational skill sets that the pros possess, and then trying to essentially mirror some elements of that for the kids in the classroom, so that if they choose to go into an area of let's say, cinematography, and they want to be a professional cinematographer, is that they will understand the basics of composition and lighting, and then get into the finer detail about how to manage the device itself, the camera itself. But if you don't understand composition and lighting, then it really doesn't matter if you know how to make the cameras, change the camera's frame rate. It doesn't matter. So that's why I say media literacy. It's being able to effectively communicate through media in that manner.
I think it speaks to that because you were showing us some tools that are within Google Drive that can be used that are free. Maybe it's not Photoshop, but you know, it's the vocabulary and it's learning how to do photo editing that matters. And even, you know, I've run that one with parents many times. I said, I'm not teaching Microsoft Word, I'm teaching word processing. And that usually gets through to them that, oh, you're right, it doesn't have to be a software package. Well, I'm looking at classrooms today, and I think all of those types of technologies coming in are kind of intimidating to some teachers. And you know, you've got a background in it, but there are a lot of teachers who may have never even held a movie camera. How do we reassure them that this is going to work out and it's going to be all right to allow the access?
I think the first reassurance is that it's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
I don't know why so many teachers feel like they can't make a mistake, and I will defend the teachers in the sense that in some cases it's probably because of the culture that the administration has created. Mm-hmm. And then the other side to it may be on the individual themselves in regards to which we're all guilty of it to a large extent, is the artificial barriers we create for ourselves, both through our action and our inaction. And so, you know, for teachers that don't have a knowledge, or excuse me, don't have a skill set in any particular area, the first thing that I always encourage them to do is try to identify any of your students that do have that, because chances are, unless you're really asking for something obscure, chances are, in the case of, like you said, you know, being able to film and produce film and video, I would say that probably more than half the kids nowadays either have watched a YouTube video or recorded something on their phone, and in many cases recorded something on their phone that they've then uploaded to YouTube. So those are the kids that I would encourage those teachers to seek out and essentially turn them into the layer of teaching that goes on in their learning environment that either they have a gap in, or they want to, and quite frankly, they're willing to let the kids do it, as long as they provide them a degree of parameters and guidance. So that's the main thing nowadays. With technology ever changing, it's continually going transformations, you know, at minimum on an annual basis, and you know, if you go according to Moore's law, it's every 18 months.
Right.
You know, it's not a function of necessarily trying to keep up. What it's more is having a mindset that I'm not worried about keeping up, because as long as I can tap into the skill set of my current students, then they're still going to get a meaningful learning experience anyway.
Do you recommend any particular online resources or people to follow that would have some recommendations, tutorials about, say, video editing, photo editing?
Oh, there's so much out there.
There is.
I mean, there's so photo editing. You know, one is The Grid by Scott Kelby, which is it's fantastic. There's so many different podcasts out there. I guess, you know, really what it boils down to is not where do you find it, is how do you find it.
And that would be helpful.
Yeah, so...
What do we Google?
Yeah, so what do you Google? Well, one, it depends on what platform you have. So if you have access to MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iPad, even iPhone, I know, because I know for a fact there's a massive library of resources that are out there for learning with that. And in some cases, some of those resources are aligned with certain apps that you can get.
That's great.
The other thing is, if you're Googling, I would just start off with some generic searches, you know, video editing tutorial. I mean, I would say probably the most valuable resource for some of that is YouTube.
I would agree.
You can pretty much find a lesson on anything on YouTube. and not all are good, but that's
Right.
one where hopefully the teacher will vet the quality of them before
Mm-hmm.
they get introduced to the kids. And that's also why I'm a staunch believer in districts not blocking YouTube at all.
Right.
Give the teachers the flexibility to manage their classes and filter out what's not needed and what is needed, but more importantly, you're opening up the doors to access to at which point now I think is probably our most valuable resource.
Mm-hmm. I recommend playlists all the time to
Yes.
teachers. If you don't put content up there, you should be at least creating playlists for your students so they have an easy resource library that you recommend and
Yes.
that you're always updating. I can't emphasize that more. It's just so simple to do. Every time you see a video on there that you find relevant for your class, you just click add to playlist and you're done, and you're providing that to your students. I will recommend one of your colleagues, Jim Sill.
Absolutely.
He has some wonderful resources on starting video production with students and what to be creating with them. I actually used some of his resources for a video club on the 4-shot video. It's an introductory. Loved it. It worked beautifully. I got some wonderful compositions that way. I can't say enough.
That's a great exercise. So it's
Mm-hmm.
you know, establishing long, medium, close-up. Just that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fantastic introduction to composition and storytelling, and it literally is that simple, just 4 shots.
It was.
And so I used to do that all the time as well. And in fact, Jim is a great resource, and I don't know if he has anything online, but a gentleman that Jim and I are good friends with is Frank Gutler, who used to be the AFI Screen Ed instructor. So he's got a number of resources out there as well that align film and video production with, you know, many of our content areas as far as the process, and then ultimately, you know, depending upon what classroom you have, the product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. What about, let's go back to media literacy just a little bit. Helping students sort through really the riffraff that's out there and try to get to some good content. Is there something that can help us out with that as teachers?
Well, you're going to find riffraff content even on regular television.
Sure.
So, one, it's not exclusive to the digital space. The main thing is having the wherewithal and the skill set to be able to avoid that or essentially decrease that signal. Mm-hmm. In some cases, with YouTube, it's probably doing searches at youtube.com/education.
Absolutely.
In other cases, it is using other websites, which you've done a podcast, my good friend Rushton Hurley, nextvista.org. That's another good resource, both for videos as well as the process. And the thing that Rushton does that I think is of great value is that he has a number of contests throughout the year, which, you know, the very nature of a contest, you know, at least subconsciously for the kids is I better do a good job because I'm competing against other students that are doing videos. Mm-hmm. And no, not everybody wins, which I think is good as well because, you know, part of that can serve a meaningful learning purpose. But yeah, those are the only options or only strategies I would say right now, because ultimately, even if the kids get to undesirable content, for me, again, going to literacy, now it's information literacy. It's being able to vet that content as quickly as possible to identify it as not useful, mm-hmm. you know, not reliable, you know, things of that nature, and then just moving on.
And you've got, usually in a school, a media or library center of some kind, and they're teaching that in text form on a regular basis, and you can apply those same strategies to any kind of visual form as well. And I feel like the students sometimes forget, so it maybe needs to be reinforced in the classroom mm-hmm. that this is the same skill set that you're going to use when you're looking at a video.
That's right.
Another one of my favorites is to use Google Scholar. Actually going in when you're doing a search for video, if you're going through Google Scholar, I tend to find much more relevant and content-based videos and images that way.
Yes.
And I think my teachers, at least when I've told them about it, have been very happy with what they're students are finding that way.
I like Google Scholar. The only catch with Google Scholar is if you work with a lot of ELL students, the language is used is not as approachable. That's my only issue with Scholar, because if you know, again, a lot of the resources use what we would identify as high academic language, which is not necessarily approachable for ELL students. But with that being said, Scholar is still a valuable resource. It's just it may not work in every classroom. So like with a lot of the kids that I worked with, it worked with some but not all of them, because they didn't have a grasp of that degree of language.
I think I was I guess I was thinking more of the video searches that I'm able to find through there. But I agree with you. If you're just doing an overall Google Scholar search, you're going to find some pretty high level.
You can, articles. That's right. But it doesn't mean it's not valuable. Ideally, we want our kids to reach a point where they can use that as their option. And the good thing about Scholar is that, you know, unlike when you're enrolled in grad school and you're told to use the ERIC database, Scholar is just out there and available.
Right.
You know, so you don't have to. It doesn't require a subscription.
Well, we find that with Google in general. We've got massive number of databases that our schools have subscribed to, but if you watch students practice, they just Google.
They just Google it. That's
right. So we need to give them all those advanced search strategies so that they're sure to get the right kind of content.
Exactly, and of course that goes to information literacy. It's having those skill sets. So
they go hand in hand, and really that's, I think the point we're trying to make is that these kind of teachers in the school need to work together and need to fundamentally make sure that those lessons are aligned and work in conjunction. Yeah. So if I've got an art history class and we're doing image searches, that should be going right along with the English class when they're doing regular content searches.
That's right. That's right.
It works great.
That's an ideal setup. Ideal. Yeah. I agree.
Well, today we still have a demo slam. We've got more sessions. I know you're running another session, I'm sure. What I'd like for our listeners to hear is where they can find you online.
Okay, so on Twitter it is at @K_Shelton. My personal website is kennethshelton.net, and now your listeners will hear I have probably 36 drafts of blog postings that I need to go ahead and just start putting out there. I need to show my work. Part of my hesitation on those has been that I have all these ideas of what I want to capture and write and post, and I never actually post them because I'm always coming up with other ideas of things I want to do. So I do need to do that. But anyway, it's kennethshelton.net, and yeah, I will do my best to get those blog postings out there, and that's how I can be found.
And Google
and
Plus?
At a Google Summit near you.
Yes,
that's
of
right.
course.
With the team, EdTech team.
Where are you going to be next? Is it?
So the next event that we have coming up that I will be at is our summit in Calgary.
Oh, nice.
And then after that, that same week, later in the week, we have the Google Palooza up in Chicago for Chicago Public Schools. And then, you know, going on for the rest of this year, we'll be in Singapore, Melbourne, Australia, San Diego, Ottawa. Where else we have? Colorado. I'll be at our event in London. We have Kentucky. I'll be at that one. I'll also be at the one we have in Turkey in November. We have an iOS event coming up in New Zealand in November. A lot. Mexico, I believe, is also in November. Montreal in December.
This is a whole new meaning to well-traveled. Sorry.
Well-traveled, but I get to meet lots of fantastic educators, and it does give me, you know, since I'm no longer in a classroom, it doesn't change. It doesn't take away my experiences in the classroom. What it actually has done for me is given me a nice, broad representation of what's going on in classrooms elsewhere in the U.S. and other parts of the world, and that was why I shared earlier that you know there really isn't a whole lot between what we have here and what's elsewhere, and what's being used here and what's being used elsewhere. And like I said, in fact, in some countries that we would identify as potentially more advanced than us actually aren't. And so, you know, that's where I've been fortunate enough to do that. And, you know, for me, I like I like chatting with other educators and finding out what their stories are and what their experiences are, and if I'm able to bring those into any of my keynotes or my sessions, then all to the better, because one can be reassuring for us, or depending upon your perspective, it can be alarming.
I agree with you. You know, every time I go to a session, I have something that I can bring back, because as a technology coach, that's exactly why I'm here, is to bring something new and different to my teachers, or just a perspective. And that's a lot of what the keynotes do.
Yeah.
They give it a concept, and they give it a bubble, and they make me realize that it all does fit together in a certain way. Ken, I really thank you for the interview and chance
Pleasure.
to be here, and looking forward to the rest of this summit. It's going to be amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
They always are.
They are. So thanks for being on EdReach, where we give educators a voice, a big voice.